Hello, J.R. Thomas of the George Ranch Historical Park, and right now, today, folks, we're going to talk about the old 300 families. Now, these old 300, well, they are the first 300 families that were invited by Stephen F. Austin to come from the United States to Texas to get free land. Land out east in the United States is too expensive. Smallest amount you can buy is 80 acres of land, and the cheapest you would be able to buy is $1.25 per acre. That may be hard to understand, folks. You need $100. Well, $100 back then for land, well, that equals about $50,000 in today's money. How many of you have $50,000 in cash right now? Yeah. So with Mr. Austin, well, the land is free, but he levies a surveying fee. So you, for the first time in your entire life, you get a clear, legitimate, legal title to your land. And it's 1/10 the price. Now, remember how I said $50,000 in the United States for land? What if you could get 80 acres here in Texas for $5,000? Would you be interested? Well, of course you should be. But there is not enough money in all of Texas to fill a coffee pot. So Mr. Austin, he takes cattle. And in the early 1800s, guys, there's over 25,000 wild longhorn cattle roaming free just around here, just waiting to be picked up, lassoed, branded, and then all of a sudden, you own them. And a longhorn cow and calf will pay for 100 acres of land. So you have a free way of paying it off. Excellent. Let's put these down. But for the folks who come here, you speak with Mr. Austin. He wants to know, are you going to be a farmer or rancher? Now, these families who received the land grants, they weren't really from Texas. They were from places like, the border states like Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, even Missouri. They were close. These 300 families, you had some conditions. Well, one, you have to become a citizen of Mexico because now you're in Mexico. Now, you have to become Roman Catholic, at least on paper. You want to practice another religion, but for all intents and purposes, you are Catholic. You have to give up your American citizenship. You have to become Roman Catholic, and then also you could have never been in trouble with the law. You have to bring a letter of reference to get that land. And it has to come from your mayor or your sheriff, okay? So, good quality person. And then also, when you get that land, you get that 4,428 acres of land. Within 2 years, guys, 2 years, you have to build a house. Now, there were 300 families, only 7 families did not build a house, did not get the permanent land grants, the permanent home. So those 7 families had to go back to the United States. And even more interesting, of those 300 families, only 4 people who signed the contract, the 4 heads of the house, only 4 of them were illiterate. How about that? Also, guys, with the old 300, they got the best deal because in your contract, in your paperwork, for the first 6 years that you live here, guys, you don't pay any taxes. Every dollar and peso you make belongs to you. And then the 6 years after that, you pay half taxes. So how many of y'all would like 4,428 acres of land and a 12-year tax break? Of course you would. Now, Mr. Austin's colony for these first 300 families went from Galveston Bay all the way down to Matagorda Bay, all along. And then it went as far north as College Station, home of the Aggies, and all the way west corner, all the way down there to Bastrop. That is a huge setup. And mostly the families, actually all the families, either set up along here, along the Brazos, the Colorado River, or even the San Bernard River. Thank you very much.
William Morton got his land grant in 1824. Now, he was given a league on one side of the Brazos River and a labor on the other in the bend of the river. So he started operating a ferry to go between the two because he built his house on one side of the river and he had his cows on the other, so he needed to keep track of them. Now, in 1825, he had a visitor. So William Morton was a Freemason, and the visitor was also a Freemason. His name was Robert Gillespie. Now, he came and he stayed with William Morton for a little while, and then he died. So William Morton, who was actually a brick mason as well, built him a tombstone, built him a grave. And that is what started Morton Cemetery. So William Morton actually died not too long after that. He died in 1833. He was swept away in a flood and his body was never found. So even though we have a cemetery named after him, the Morton Cemetery, William Morton is nowhere to be found. So you might be wondering, where am I right now? Well, I'm in Morton Cemetery. This is the grave that William Morton made for Robert Gillespie. And during the Texas Revolution, the Mexican army actually camped in Morton Cemetery. Some of the soldiers started to deface this grave, but one of the officers recognized the Freemason symbols, and he was also a Mason himself, so he stopped them from desecrating the grave. Now, if you come to Morton Cemetery, there are a number of famous Texans buried here. Jane Long, Maribel B. Lamar, but it is still a working cemetery. There's still people being buried here all the time. Henry Jones and his family got their land grant in 1824. Their land was located along the Brazos River, near where 59 and the city of Booth are today. Now, on their land, they did a lot of ranching, a little bit of farming, and this family lived there for quite some time because today, his family's land is a part of the George Ranch Historical Park. This is the 1830s stock farm, and this is a recreation of what Henry Jones and his family could have lived in. This is a dog trot cabin. Thomas Barnett got his land grant in 1824, but he didn't really live on it because in 1825 he married Nancy Spencer, who had her own land grant. So they both moved on to her land grant, which was along the Brazos River and Highway 36 today. Now, you might be wondering, what did they do with two separate land grants? Mostly ranching. They had a whole bunch of cows and they had a whole bunch of children. Now, you might wonder, what's on their land today? So Nancy Spencer's land doesn't really have a ton on it, but Thomas Barnett's land is where Sienna Plantation subdivision is today. Now the last question you might be asking yourself is, why am I standing in front of the Moore home? Very simple. Thomas Barnett's granddaughter was Lottie Dyer Moore, who married John Moore Sr., who built this house. So this is their legacy.